Centennial Institute is in its 7th year. If we had the resources of the Heritage Foundation or even the enviable resources of a place that I used to work, dear friends of mine, Independence Institute, we might have full-time focus on some of the most vital issues, one of them being who gets to come to America and stay, our topic for this evening. As it is, we have to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. We swoop in on an issue, we try to shed light on that issue for you, and then a month later or the next publication, it may be on to something else. But looking back over now our 7th year, we have repeatedly raised this question with debates and forums and policy briefs, this question of who gets to come to America. There was a time when there was absolutely no government supervision of our land borders to the north and south or our long sea coasts, our 3 coasts, as our Gulf friends like to remind us, the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast. You could come to the land of opportunity and make your way if the good Lord would favor your hard work, and that was it. That's not the world that we live in today, but there are some who wish that we could practically go back to an uncontrolled access to the United States of America and allow markets to prevail. If the country were overloaded, people would decide, well, I won't come, or I'd better go back to where I came from. There are others who don't quite say close the borders, but it's almost to the point where you would get the impression that some would say, we'd be fine if nobody else ever came here to live, at least for quite a long time. We actually hear sometimes people say, let's have a moratorium. Neither of those solutions, pure and simple as they may sound, really would be very workable for America in its position of world leadership with its ideals of being the land of opportunity, also a nation that respects the rule of law and not the arbitrary dictates of any bureaucrat or politician, even the man sitting in the White House. So we need to find a middle ground. We say that Centennial Institute is a think tank. I can't think of an occasion when I've had 100 people in the room and the challenge before us with 4 very thoughtful presenters to guide us in this challenge, the challenge to really think hard, not just posture with our opinions, or not just blue sky with what we wish could happen, but to combine facts and logic and experience and values and a discernment of the realities, the immutable realities of human nature. Did you know I could get hauled up on charges for even saying the words human nature on most of the university campuses in America today? I'm not exaggerating. It's one of the things that's wonderful about having Colorado Christian University in its 2nd century as a treasure here in Colorado and the western states, and really through our summit now increasingly influential across all the states. We got to respect human nature. We've got to respect facts and logic. We've got to figure out how to balance the aspiration of our values and the hard lessons of how people act, what history teaches us. That's what our 4 panelists will help us do this evening. We'll have an opening statement from each, then I'm sure there will be some discussion amongst the 4 of them, and then we're looking forward to your questions and comments and interaction with the panel. On your right, she likes to be to everyone's right if she possibly can. Centennial Institute Policy Fellow specializing in immigration studies, and an American by choice, Helen Raleigh. Grew up in China. It's not fashionable to call it Communist China anymore, but that's the only political party that's legal in their system. Helen grew up in Communist China. She wanted to study in America. She came here in the 90s. She walked the long, long road of 17 years to earn her U.S. citizenship in the autumn of 2013. Thank you, Kathy. She's an independent businesswoman in the financial sector now. She's here with her husband, Mike Raleigh, and his mom visiting from Nebraska. Nebraska. Mrs. Raleigh, we're nice to have you. Helen's book, Confucius Never Said, recently nominated for Independent Publishing Award, Book of the Year, is a book that you need in your library because she not only tells a fascinating autobiographical story, but she draws lessons, broader lessons that you and I can profit from at the end of each chapter. Confucius Never Said. I butchered that the first time I ever introduced you on a panel, but I got it right tonight, Helen, did I?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. You got it right.
Sitting next to Helen Raleigh, another American by choice, but from the other side of the world. He hails from the part of the world that most of us in the room would trace our ancestry. Anders Ingemarson came to the USA in 1994 from his native Sweden, became a U.S. citizen in 2002. He is currently with CenturyLink in IT, but interesting, varied technology career, a graduate of leadership program of the Rockies, and as his leadership program challenge upon completing that terrific citizens training experience, he started a blog that I'm going to be looking at, and I encourage you to do the same. It goes by the short name of Separate. The full name, when you find it on the internet, is Separate State and the Economy. Now, there's something that's going to take until at least after breakfast tomorrow to get done. Separate State and the Economy. So we're glad Anders Ingemarson and his wife are with us this evening. Then continuing down the row, I want you to know my friend Randy Corporon. You can hear him on the radio every morning, weekdays on KLZ. It's called Wake Up with Randy Corporon. I'm not an early morning kind of a guy, but he makes early mornings very well worthwhile. You don't need to go near the coffee pot, and Randy Corporon will caffeinate you. The Tea Party movement, which as recently as Saturday made its might felt in Colorado Republican politics, was one that Randy Corporon has been part of from the outset. And the Arapaho Tea Party, still one of the most active and effective of those grassroots citizen groups that you'll find anywhere in Colorado, led by Randy Corporon. Finally, at the end, my friend of many years, Linda Chavez. You hear the Hispanic surname, and you might think that her ancestry is recent in the USA. Try 1698 in what is now New Mexico, that the Chavez ancestry proudly traces more than 300 years back. Makes me feel like I just waded the river by comparison.
Actually, it's 1598, John. I have to correct you.
What's 100 years among friends? I knew that. I wanted to see if she was paying attention. Linda Chavez graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder in 1970. She was the highest ranking political appointee in Ronald Reagan's White House. She was the first woman of Hispanic descent ever nominated for a cabinet post, and this was under President George W. Bush. When the nomination ran into political headwinds, she consulted and thought it the best part of wisdom to step aside for the benefit of the president and his larger goals. In a better world, though, Linda would have been Secretary of Labor, and she would have been an excellent one. She's written a terrific book about the corruption that labor unions, worthy as they might have begun, bring into our political system now. Her other books include such thought-provoking titles as An Unlikely Conservative. She's written a nationally syndicated conservative column for 30 years. It's in newspapers across the country. You see her on Fox News as a contributor frequently. Another book with a thought-provoking title, Out of the Barrio, Toward a New Politics of Hispanic Assimilation. let's camp on the last word there. I hope it's a word that we're going to explore as the discussion unfolds tonight, assimilation. None of this salad bowl stuff that you come here and retain your cultural or ethnic or linguistic separateness. How about the old melting pot, the assimilation ideal? Here's someone who's literally written the book on it. So we'll hear in the order, not quite the order that you met them. We're going to hear first from Helen Raleigh, then from Randy Corporon, then from Linda Chavez, and finally from Anders Ingemarson. And we're going to ask them not just around the edges, what don't you like, or would you change if you could tweak the immigration system, but what does it mean to do immigration right? Please welcome the panelists, and let's hear first from Helen Raleigh.
Thank you, John, for that very kind introduction. And thanks Centennial Institute for putting on such a great topic for the issue Monday. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on a weekday. As you heard, my name is Helen Raleigh, an immigrant from communist China, an American by choice. 17 years, that was how long it took me to become a US citizen. During this very long journey, I experienced high financial cost, long delays, and worst of all, separation from my family. Unfortunately, millions of legal immigrants are all too familiar with the life I just described. The US legal immigration process is notorious for its excessive wait, huge backlogs, strict quotas, complexity, high cost, and inconsistent treatment among subsegments of immigration population. Having walked down this road myself, I believe the number one priority of immigration reform is to reform the legal immigration system. Immigration is not only an illegal immigration issue. The majority of our country's immigration population is legal immigrants. As a matter of fact, 30 million out of the 41 million immigrants are legal immigrants. However, as a majority, legal immigrants have very little to say in the current immigration debate. Our experiences offer no motivation for illegal immigrants to participate in the legal immigration process. It is reasonable to predict the United States will never fix its illegal immigration problem unless policymakers fix the legal immigration problem first. Before proposing any solutions, we need to reaffirm the key principles that this country was founded upon. To me, there are at least three. First, all men are created equal. Second, we are a country rule of law. Third, we the people believe and practice self-reliance. Upon reaffirming these principles, I proposing the following ideas with the objective to keep our legal immigration system transparent, simple, and fair. First, let's eliminate ineffective and unfair visa programs, starting with the visa lottery program. Second, let's consolidate all different work visas type into just one for skilled workers. Let the free market determine what skilled worker is desirable. Third, eliminating annual visa quota and the country of origin limitation. This is imperative to cut the backlog and greatly reduce the wait time. Finally, let's adopt a scoring system to pre-screen applications and attract skilled immigrants. Immigration reform alone won't be completely successful unless we also address two other factors. One, we need to reform the social welfare programs that turn independent, adventurous immigrants into dependents of our society. Believe me, it takes a special character and courage to want to leave your family and the culture behind and want to be an immigrant. Anyone who has the tenacity to travel hundreds and thousands of miles to get here has the ability to stand on his own if we just let him. The second factor is that every immigrant has the responsibility to make a concrete effort to assimilate to American culture. America has always been and will always be a country of immigrants. Even the loudest opponents of immigration reform today can trace their heritage to somewhere outside of America. As President Reagan put it at his final White House ceremony, quote, "Thanks to each wave of new arrivals to this land of opportunity, we are a nation forever young, forever bursting with energy and new ideas, and always on the cutting edge, always leading the world to the next frontier. This quality is vital to our future as a nation. If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost." End quote. Today, we face an outdated immigration system which does not serve our economic interests or our national needs. But I'm confident that if we can stand firm on our principles and apply common sense reform, we can establish an effective immigration system, and we will continue to be the greatest nation on earth. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you very much. And I failed to mention that Randy Corporon makes his living as one of Denver's most effective courtroom attorneys. He will now present the brief for his point of view. Randy.
And no objections allowed. John, thank you. I think it's important to know about the people that are here to talk to you. And I'm not a legal immigrant from Sweden who is here thinking about, writing about these very important issues like my friend and fellow classmate from Leadership Program of the Rockies, Anders Ingemarson. I am certainly not a legal immigrant who grew up in communist China and wrote a great book about my life and is a fellow here writing about these important issues. Also a fellow classmate in a different year from LPR. And I am most certainly not a Hispanic woman who has worked for Presidents Reagan and Bush and has written the books that you heard described and is a distinguished fellow here reading, writing, and thinking about these issues. So it makes me wonder, why am I here? So let me just tell you a little bit about me. I was actually born about 9 miles from here, and I've lived in Ohio and Chicago and London, England, and Florence, Italy for a little bit. But I spent the vast majority of my life right here in Colorado. I dropped out of high school when I was 15. I never went back. I washed dishes and scrubbed floors and mowed lawns and fixed cars. I did the jobs that they tell us now Americans won't do. And I did it because I had to, because that's how I made my way in the world. And while I was doing all that for years, I started going to school part-time. And I eventually got a degree. And then I got into law school, and I've been litigating and solving problems in Colorado for 17 years. That, to me, is an American story. Now, I think John just wanted to make me feel important tonight because I don't have the insight, and I haven't studied these issues as carefully as the people who are up here on this panel. But I am the chairman of what most people say is the largest Tea Party group in Colorado. I'm affiliated with the national group Tea Party Patriots. And I do spend 3 hours a day now listening to callers and learning and reading and talking about the issues that are important to our kids and our grandkids and our state. And because I think a strong and secure and stable and prosperous America is so critical to international stability, we talk about the issues that matter to the entire world. And so I think that's probably part of the reason why I'm here. How does immigration fit into all that? The premise of tonight, doing immigration right, based on these conservative principles, equality, fairness, free markets, rule of law. Immigration, the way we're doing it now, is wrong on all of those principles. We're not focusing on enforcing our laws. We're not taking advantage of 21st century technology to focus on encouraging and streamlining the process to bring skilled and unskilled labor safely and easily across our border and back out as we deem to need, as our markets dictate that we need. Instead, the ruling class in both political parties right now is focused on numbers, big numbers of unskilled, uneducated, illegal immigrants coming across. For the Democrats and the unions, it's a permanent voting and membership class. For the Republicans and K Street and the Chamber of Commerce, it's cheap labor to keep wages low and profits high. And then we have the politics, the political environment that we have to live in today. And I found this quote. I'm going to read it to you. It's not very long. And if you've heard this is starting to go around, please don't answer. I want to know if anybody in the audience can identify this speaker. Our borders have overflowed with illegal immigrants, placing tremendous burdens on our criminal justice system, schools, and social programs. The Immigration and Naturalization Service needs the ability to step up enforcement. Our federal wallet is stretched to the limit by illegal aliens getting welfare, food stamps, medical care, and other benefits, often without paying any taxes. Safeguards like welfare and free medical care are in place to boost Americans in need of short-term assistance. These programs were not meant to entice freeloaders and scam artists from around the world. Who does that sound like today? Anybody have a guess on that? Anybody at all? Governor Dick Lamb, that's a good guess. Anybody else? Dwight D. Eisenhower. That was former U.S. Senate Majority Leader Democrat Harry Reid in 1993. My, how far we have fallen. Last summer, we all witnessed the train cars coming in loaded with children all over the tops and inside and outside, dangerous trips. 58,000 unaccompanied alien children. Those children were solicited to come here by our government. How do we know that? Listen to this advertisement that was on the government website where the government solicits private contracts. There was an ad there, and part of it said this: escort services include, but are not limited to, assisting with transferring physical custody of 65,000 unaccompanied alien children from the Department of Homeland Security to Health and Human Services via ground or air, property inventory, providing meals, drafting reports, generating documents, maintaining daily supplies, clothing as needed, coordinating with DHS and HHS staff, and on and on and on. That ad on a government website was put up in January of 2014, months before these children started flooding across our shores. This was solicited and encouraged by our government. Now we're in the midst of President Obama's illegal, unconstitutional executive amnesty. These massive Republican majorities that were elected in November have failed to keep their collective campaign promise not to fund it. It's stopped right now only by a single judge's order. At least 5 million illegals will be impacted by this if it's allowed to proceed. And just last month, the IRS commissioner confirmed that those people will be eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit, not only going forward, but looking back 3 years. The Earned Income Tax Credit, that's $5,000 to $8,000 per person per year. We're talking about billions of dollars. And I don't care if it's 1 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion. It is not fair to rob the American treasury. Nobody voted for this at all. This theft or transfer of the production, the resources of our society, you can see it everywhere. Free education is required by the United States Supreme Court. Free medical care for any illegal who comes within 250 yards of an American hospital. A misunderstanding of the 14th Amendment provides for birthright citizenship. A pregnant illegal alien can run across the border, deliver her baby on the American side, and open up herself, her family, and future generations to the full benefits of the American welfare system. We've got legislation that encourages chain migration. Not just moms and dads or brothers and sisters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. It goes on and on and on. So here's the way I look at it. I am extremely open, and I look forward to engaging with the ideas that I expect that we'll hear tonight, and hopefully that we'll hear from you as well. I want to hear how we're going to streamline the legal immigration system. I want to learn how we're going to maximize the benefits to our society. I want to hear how we're going to deal with the illegal immigrants that are already here, the children, the destitute, the terrorists that wish us harm, and the scared and hungry soul who is truly looking for a way to make a better life in America, not take a better life from the American taxpayer. I want to hear those ideas. But I believe, and this is why I get up early every single morning and talk to people for 3 hours a day, that someone has to stand up. Somebody has to be a backstop. We have to demand fairness to Americans. There's no idea that I will consider that comes from this panel today, no plan or scheme that I will not actively and aggressively oppose unless, number one, it completes the border fence that was authorized into law back in 2007. It denies the benefits of citizenship and access to our welfare system to anyone whose very first act in this country as an adult was to break our laws. It has to favor English proficiency or a pathway requirement to get there. And it has to require of the immigrant who wants to stay here some objective, testable understanding of American history and our constitutional values. We are not a nation of immigrants. Stop saying it. We are a nation of citizens. And we have to remember that the path back to a successful, a free, and a civil society, the path to individual success for those who choose to give up their homeland and come here, is through hard work, good intentions, and assimilation into our precious, our treasured, and our desired American way of life. That's where I sit.
Did you notice the way he talked himself down, complimented the other panelists? He practically got down on a knee and shined their shoes. Then he proceeds to take the opening kickoff and drive the ball into the end zone on about 8 plays. Coach Gary Kubiak couldn't have done it any better, Randy. You lower their expectations and then you take the ball right in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I told you he would caffeinate the occasion. Linda Chavez, I meant to add in introducing her distinguished resume, is the head of not one but 2 policy institutes. One, the Center for Equal Opportunity, and the other, with a fascinating name, and I think we'll learn some more about it as she speaks to us now, the Becoming American Institute, picking up that theme I admired in her earlier book title about assimilation. Linda, how do you see this vexed issue? Linda Chavez.
Well, thank you very much, John, and it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. And I have to tell you that if I am a little bit slow tonight, it's because I've come a very long way. I started the week in Berlin, and speaking about walls, I was at the remnants of the Berlin Wall. The last time I had been in Berlin was in 1987, when that wall was still up. So it's a great pleasure to be here today, and I do want to talk about legal immigration, because when we hear the term immigration today, it seems like all we ever talk about is illegal immigration. And Helen is absolutely right. Most of the immigrants, the overwhelming majority of the immigrants who are in the United States today, are legal immigrants. But there's another important reason I want to talk about legal immigration, and that's because I'm concerned about illegal immigration. I am concerned about our border. I'm not all that worried about the landscapers and the nannies and the drywall hangers and the others who are crossing our borders and coming here hoping to put food on the table for their children, either back in their home countries or here. But I am concerned about terrorists. I am very concerned about the drug cartels, and I am concerned about the human traffickers that prey on young women and children and bring them here to satisfy the perversions of those who would prey on them in the United States. I want a secure border. Now, you are going to hear something today, probably, that you've not heard before, and that is that our border, in terms of the flow of illegal immigrants into the United States, is actually more secure today than it has been at any time in almost half a century. The numbers of people illegally trying to get into the United States have dropped precipitously. They are at a 43-year low. The last time we saw illegal immigration as low as it has been this last year was in 1971. Now, there are two reasons for that. One is the economy. Most of the people who come here illegally are coming here for one reason. They're coming here to work. And there haven't been as many jobs being created. And so word travels back home. It travels from people already here back to villages in Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador and elsewhere, that the jobs simply aren't here. So people stop trying to come. But the other reason is that we have invested a great deal in border security. We now spend more on our border patrol than we do on all other federal law enforcement combined. We have more than doubled the number of Border Patrol agents that we had in 2001. And all of that is a good thing. And yes, we have built fences, and we have put in some high-tech devices, and we need to continue to do that. Again, mostly to keep out the really bad guys who would do us ill. But if we really want a secure border, the only way we are going to stop those still fairly high numbers of over 300,000 people who try to sneak into the United States and do successfully do so each year, the only way we're going to do that is by creating a system that gives people a legal way to come. Illegal immigrants who come here to work come here illegally, not because they're too lazy or too dumb to figure out how to get here legally. They come here illegally because there is no path for them to come legally. Now, we do have a very generous immigration policy in the United States. And as some of the anti-immigration groups will point out, the United States takes in more immigrants legally than all the other nations of the world combined. But we also need more people, and in fact have benefited by the fact we take in so many newcomers. If you look at this room, just look around you, there are a lot of gray hairs here, gray-headed people here, and in fact mine would be too if it weren't for Lady Clairol, I can assure you. We are a nation that is aging. The median age of US-born Americans is 42 years. The median age of immigrants is lower, and the median age of Hispanics is an astonishing 28. If you look at the median age of US-born Hispanics, it's even lower. It's 18. Without that population of young people coming into the United States, those of us, like myself, who are on Medicare and who are on Social Security, would not have the chance to have those benefits provided to us. Now, we heard from Helen about her plan, and I endorse every single thing that you said, Helen, in terms of what would make a correct legal immigration program. It should be primarily skills-based. We should have some portion of our immigration that is set aside to be able to do what currently drives our immigration system, and that is to reunify families. But that ought to be pretty selective. It ought to be spouses being able to bring in a spouse. It ought to be parents being able to bring in children who are minors, and perhaps young immigrants being able to bring in their parents. But having the kind of chain migration that Randy talked about, where people are bringing in brothers and sisters and the ever-expanding family, and having that drive our entire immigration policy doesn't make sense. We need to bring into this country the kind of people who will do the jobs that need doing. And I will disagree a little bit with Randy here. He talked about the jobs that he took when he was growing up. Well, my dad took those kinds of jobs, and I took those kinds of jobs. But unfortunately, young people today are not taking, young American-born people are not taking those jobs today. And so we need to look at the skills that people bring, and we need to decide who it is that is going to fill those needs. And we have two basic needs. We have needs for people at the high end of the skill set, the so-called STEM workers who are in the sciences, who are in technology, who are in engineering, who are in mathematics. We graduate too few US citizens, American-born students, to go into those fields, and we need more of those workers in order to fuel our economy. And interestingly, we already are educating many foreign-born students here, but then when they get their degree, we send them home. We don't let them stay to be able to contribute and take advantage of their skills that we've helped pay for right here in the US. But we also need people at the other end of the skill set. According to a Bureau of Labor Statistics study that was done just recently, between 2008 and 2018, it's estimated that 63% of the jobs that will be created will in fact require a high school degree or less. Well, one of the great things about America is that we are educating our children. And the average American today has more than a high school education. He has about 2 years of college. In the median, and among the young, it's even higher. So there are jobs that do not take that kind of education. There are jobs in the agricultural field, there are jobs in meat processing, there are construction jobs, there are laborers' jobs that don't require those skills. And what we have found in studies that have looked at the effect of immigrant workers on the economy, what we have found is that immigrants actually boost the wages of the American-born. They don't lower those wages, they actually boost them. Now, it's a modest boost, it's not a huge boost, but it is a boost. And in addition to that, we know by looking at the studies of welfare use among the US-born and immigrants that immigrants are far less likely to use welfare than are the American-born. They comprise a smaller portion, proportionately, of welfare recipients than do the native-born. And even those who do receive benefits, and by the way, Randy, if you're illegally in the United States, you're not entitled to any welfare programs. You are entitled to emergency medical treatment, that is true, and you are entitled to education. but you are not entitled to any of the cash or other benefits that are available to the U.S. born. There was a very interesting study that just came out this year that looked at our Medicare system and looked at the Medicare Trust Fund. And again, it will surprise you probably to learn that in the years studied between 1996 and 2011, immigrants contributed $182 billion, that's billion with a B, more in their contributions into the Medicare Trust Fund than they took out in benefits. And by the way, among the American born, it was about 80 billion more that the American born took out of that trust fund than they contributed. So I want a legal immigration system that has all of the attributes that Helen talked about. It needs to be fair, it needs to be enforceable, and it needs to be based on what we need as a country. And what we need is people who are enterprising, who are willing to come here to work. And then once they come here, we need to help turn them into Americans. Thank you very much.
Linda Chavez, thank you very much. You know, if you go around the world and you're looking for diplomacy and tact and smooth, elegant intellect, just can't do better than the Swedes. So we're going to toss it to Anders Ingemarson and ask him to tie a nice ribbon around the fascinating information and in some cases clashing points of view that you have just heard. Anders.
Thank you, John. I've actually rescinded my Swedish citizenship, so I consider myself.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I'm going to look at this from a slightly different angle to provide you with some food for thought, and I'm actually going to pick on conservatives. Not because I think conservatives are especially guilty about what I'm going to talk about, but because I think you're open to a good rational argument. Not so sure about that on the other side. But it appears to me, so I'm going to look a little bit at the morality of the immigration laws. It appears to me that many conservatives criticizing illegal immigration, they forget about the moral dimension of the law. They forget to ask themselves, is this law good? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Or is it bad, unethical, immoral? Now, the standard for morally evaluating a law is right there in the Declaration of Independence. Helen touched on it. All men are created equal. We have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the Declaration embraces the fact that rights are inseparable from who we are as human beings. That's what inalienable means. And that they apply equally to all of us. They can be violated, and God knows they are every day, all around the country, but they cannot be taken away from us. Conservatives understand this principle very well in many other areas. Take the recent gun control battle here in Colorado. All conservatives that I talk to, they claim that those new gun laws, they're immoral because they violate our right to bear arms, which is an application of your inalienable rights. Another example, going back to the 50s and 60s, conservatives were at the forefront in the desegregation battle. It was not the Democrats who drove that. Now, if you think about it, the conservatives back then, they didn't have a problem making the moral connection. Yes, the southern states had laws in place, but damn it, those laws were immoral. And when I talk to conservatives today, they don't have a problem understanding that. But somehow, and obviously there are many more examples I think you can come up with on your own, when we look at our current immigration laws, that connection somehow seems to be missed. The same moral yardstick is not used. So why is that? Well, I think there is widespread confusion over the concept of rights. So many Americans, conservatives, others, believe that the concepts of all men are created equal, we have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that they applies to citizens and legal residents of the United States only. That the Declaration of Independence, just because it happens to be our founding document, that it applies to Americans only. Now, this is a mistaken view. The fact that our country is the only one founded on these principles doesn't mean that these eternal truths apply to Americans only. They don't end at the Atlantic seaboard or the Pacific coast. They apply equally north of the border and south of the border, just like within our borders. It doesn't matter if you're born in Toronto, Tijuana, or somewhere else in the world. Your birthplace is really of no significance when it comes to these inalienable rights that we have and that we're all created equal. So I think that if conservatives understood this better, that these concepts are actually universal, then they'd realize that laws preventing people from coming here to pursue their happiness are immoral because they violate their individual rights. Let me repeat that. So if conservatives fully understood that these concepts are universal, then they'd realize that laws preventing people from coming here to pursue their happiness are immoral because they violate their inalienable rights. So by that standard, ask yourself, are the current immigration laws all that different from the segregation laws that we fought to repeal back in the 50s and 60s? Isn't it just a different form of segregation? Instead of a sign saying whites only, we put up a sign saying American citizens and legal residents only. Instead of racial segregation, we have instituted a system of segregation based on birthplace. I say principally there is not a lot of difference between the two. So morally and long term, as a vision, the only position one can take on immigration is that it should be free, with a couple of very limited exceptions. So we should end segregation based on birthplace, just like we've ended segregation based on racial preferences. Now, obviously, this raises a whole host of questions, and Randy has touched on a few of them, Linda has talked about them, and I'm sure we'll get to them in the Q&A. And no, I'm not advocating for opening the floodgates. I think Helen's policy brief and the Centennial Institute, outlines a very good starting point here. But as a vision, it is a starting point. So conservatives are supposedly the champions of our founding documents. And that includes being a champion of all men are created equals. And all men have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think it should be a no-brainer that conservatives should own the whole immigration issue. That the left has gained the upper hand here is nothing short of tragic. The left, the collectivists, they don't understand these concepts. We do. We should take the lead on this issue. So I think it's time to honor that proud conservative tradition of being out in front in ending segregation, also as it pertains to immigration, based on birthplace. So I hope that more of us can get on the long term, the vision of free immigration. It's the right thing to do. It is the moral thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you all. And Anders, very challenging reversion to the fundamentals that we stand for as a free society, that this university and Centennial Institute would never wish to stray from for one moment. I want to see if the panel have any interventions to make with each other before we open to your questions and comments of our guests this evening.
I'd like to make an intervention on Anders' behalf. The policy that you described, Anders, was in fact the policy of the United States for most of our history until 1924, with one exception. In the end of the 19th century, we kept out people who looked like Helen. We kept out the Chinese, and then we later expanded that to Japanese and Asians. Those were the first laws that we passed to restrict immigration. Again, looking out over this audience and knowing the ethnic composition of Colorado, most of the people in this room probably trace their history back to people who came from Germany, from Ireland, from England, maybe from Southern and Eastern Europe. Those people came later. But all of those immigrants came when we had a policy exactly like the one Anders described.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
And Linda, thank you for putting a sharp point on that, especially as it relates to the restriction of people from Asia, because it ties to your point, Anders, about the analogy you made of whether it's any more just to restrict by birthplace than it is by race. There was an explicit an ugly racial tone to what was done at the turn of the century of the 1900s, wasn't there, Linda? It's unpleasant to say it, but we must say it. They spoke of a yellow peril. That was the logic in those days, and it's something that we all would squirm and repudiate today. I have a feeling, speaking of shifting uneasily in your chair, that maybe Professor Corporon would like to come back at Anders and the idea of let them all on in.
Well, and I know I'm tired. It's late. Maybe I'm a little slow.
No, Linda's the one who's jet lagged. You don't get to be tired.
You don't get that.
But what do we do with the concept of country? We are the United States of America. We're not the united landmass of the world. People came together. They fought a revolution to come together under a governing document, the first in the history of the world, that acknowledged those natural rights that Anders talked about. So how do we further those goals? How do we protect our own belief in that kind of a system if we have no rules, no regulations, no organization, nothing other than hey, that America's a pretty cool place to go. Let's go there. You know, Milton Friedman said it pretty succinctly, as he often did, that you cannot have open borders and a welfare state at the same time. It just doesn't work. And
well, just pause there. Anders, how do you answer that?
Well, let's dismantle the welfare state. And again, that is a vision, right? It should be done in an organized fashion, but all the areas that we're talking about, welfare reform, social security, and so on and so forth, it's not that hard to get on a path to dismantle it, as long as the moral willingness is there to realize that all of those areas we are violating each other's rights. That would be my answer.
How do you react to this, Helen?
Well, I kind of stand in between Anders and Randy, only because, our founding father learned a lot from John Locke. So I'm going to paraphrase what John Locke says because I can't remember exactly what he said. But he did say he said in the line of, freedom is not about doing whatever you want. You can't have freedom without justice, which is without the law. And our government are instituted among us to protect our individual rights by enforced law. Granted, we have bad law, but we also have a democratic system to change it, right? If somehow, just because there are a larger group of people decide we don't like the law, so we're going to ignore it, then how are the government going to enforce other laws to protect anyone's individual rights, right? Who's there to decide then which law is to be obeyed, which law is to be ignored. That's one. The second is also, we give the government by consent, which means when you have a right to leave, but you do not necessarily have the right to entry as you please, because when you enter here, you basically give your consent, whether explicitly or inexplicitly say, I'm gonna choose to be part of this society or this club, then I'm gonna have to obey what the rule setting this one is. I mean, how many people like to pay income tax? No one. So should all of us just reject to pay income tax? Well, maybe that's the only way to get our tax reform is all of us, millions of us, to stand up against paying income tax. Maybe that's the only way we can get an income tax reform. So to me, there is a boundary.
Well, suppose that we took the Ingemarson approach in the economic sphere, and we made sure that there is an enforcement of no welfare. As Linda pointed out, that the law reads, but I think Randy would be quick to say that law is not very well enforced right now, and that there was a firewall against letting these people into the political system, except as they took the long, patient, legal way of applying to be citizens, like you did yourself, Helen. So suppose that we didn't let them vote, then they're not diluting the consent of the governed regime that you correctly attribute as fundamental to America being a workable society. Suppose it was just economic and not political. Could you entertain the Ingemarson model at that point?
Well, I'm always a free market believer. That I do believe that in an ideal state, labor and the capital should be able to flow freely, but we're not in an ideal state. So to me, it's going to take a long way for us to get there, right? That's what we. And also, I think it's naive to think all immigrants wants to become U.S. citizen, because in my paper I pulled very convincing data that over the years, only 40% of eligible legal immigrants actually choose to become U.S. citizen. Many of them willingly give up or ignore the possibility of becoming U.S. citizen because they do not necessarily want to vote. They do not want to give up allegiance to their home country, or there are various reasons. So I don't think we should tie the path to citizenship with immigration reform.
I want to hear Randy and Linda's thoughts on assimilation, acculturation, melting pot versus salad bowl. Linda, since you've been working on this for so long, how badly is multiculturalism blocking the realization or continuation of the America that we've inherited from our forebears?
Well, that's a very good question, John, because it's a difficult thing to explain in a quick 2-minute response, but I'm going to try. The fact is, the multiculturalists have won the culture wars in terms of their controls of the schools, their controls of the dialogue, even their control of corporate America. I mean, the whole diversity movement is, alive and well and very, very well entrenched in corporations in America today. And we're all about celebrating our differences. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the data, and I've been looking at it for 30 years, I've been studying the data of what is happening to the people who come here legally and illegally. What happens to them after they've been here a while? Well, the 6-year-old ends up in the Denver Public Schools, and the Denver Public Schools tries its best to make sure if that kid is from Mexico or Guatemala that he or she continues to speak Spanish, and they're happy to have them continue to speak Spanish until they're out of 12th grade, if they can keep them in that long. But of course, if they're in bilingual programs, their likelihood of dropping out is much greater than if they go into the mainstream. But despite that, they do learn English. Despite all of the efforts of the left to divide us, to put us into little ghettos of different ethnicities, the melting pot is alive and well in America. More than 97% of all second-generation Latino immigrants not only speak English perfectly well, but it is their preferred language. By the third generation, they do what every other immigrant group has done over time, and that is they lose their ability to speak the language of their grandparents. We are, in fact, assimilating people. If you look down a whole array of indices of assimilation, whether it's education levels, whether it's income, whether it's language use, or whether it's the final proof of assimilation, which is intermarriage, you find that the Hispanic immigrants today are assimilating not just as fast as the Germans and the Italians and the Poles and the others did. They're actually assimilating faster. Now, the reason for that is probably because we have mass media now, so that even if your school teachers are insisting that you learn Spanglish because they're not even teaching you decent Spanish in these bilingual programs, even if they're trying their best to do that, you're going home and you're turning on the tube, and you're not turning to Univision. I'm sorry, you're turning to American television. So assimilation is alive and well.
So you're saying that that's really happening in spite of public
In
policy
spite of it.
and political correctness that would be a contrary if that's enforced on
And
us from
I will
certain
say,
elites.
as you know, I think when you and I first met, I was president of U.S. English. I believe that we do have a national language. I would like to enshrine that national language in our Constitution. I believe that a national language is like a currency. All of us need to learn English. And so, I'm very much in favor of that. But I do think that the proof, in terms of the statistics, if you look at the data, they are assimilating.
Randy, your comments?
Well, I always get curious about statistics. You know what they say about statistics. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And you can look at numbers in a whole assorted different way. All I have to do is open up a newspaper, to drive down Federal Boulevard, to see what's happening and how we are actually balkanizing ourselves with the policies that are in place. I don't think it's a multiculturalist plan or scheme. I think that it is a radical scheme of the progressive left, the communists, the radicals who have taken control of the Democrat Party. And the reason that they divide and conquer, the reason that they invite in a more and more dependent class is because that allows them to maintain power. And so I enjoy talking about, how we can tweak this social policy and that social policy, and I love listening to the ideals that Anders is talking about. And then I'll wake up tomorrow morning, and at 5 o'clock I'll go on the radio and I'll be talking about the world as it exists today. We're not going to get rid of the welfare state in the foreseeable future. So opening them up the borders first and not enforcing our laws and our borders and fighting to the death to preserve our own American heritage, a welcoming heritage, a heritage that acknowledges and appreciates other cultures. Chinatown and Little Italy and all of those neighborhoods blossomed and flourished, but those blossomed and flourished among people who fought their way legally to come to America, to create their opportunity, force their children to learn our languages, loved being here in this country. The mass invasion that's going on the southern border right now has nothing to do with that. You can talk about lower immigration numbers right now. The job situation is certainly worse. But groups like La Raza and the government of the country of Mexico have a much different plan than just trying to get workers back and forth across the border. La Raza talks about La Conquista. They talk about in their own documents, in their own papers, that the southern portion of the United States belongs to Mexico. About 10% of the population of Mexico is living in the United States right now, if you look at the numbers. And so I insist on, if you got a flood in your basement, you don't start thinking about the new carpeting that you're going to put down there after. You stop the flood. You don't go online to think about the new house that I'm going to buy in 5 or 10 or 50 years when we finally do away with a crazy welfare state. You have to solve the problem that we have now. And people like me and those of us who refuse to let go of the America that we grew up in, not that it doesn't change or not that it doesn't adapt, we are not going to back down or shut down or be silenced because there's a better, more philosophical approach that we can take. We have to live in the world that we have now. Our country is at extreme risk under the governing system that we have and the financial collapse that is continuing. Linda talked about the production of illegals and the contributions to the economy. You can look at other statistics and see that they're taking out 3 times, and it's a big they, but you know what I'm talking about in general, taking out 3 times as much in government benefits as they're actually paying back in taxes. The low immigration, low skilled workers, because our welfare state is broken. And we had $18 trillion to stand by and be proud of because of it. We are not helping people by giving them government checks. We are not freeing people by giving them government checks. And so we have to refuse to, we can back up no more. Enough is enough.
Part of my question, Obama's plan, does that make the 5 million immediate voters or not? What's the situation there?
I'll take that on first, since you mentioned my name first. First of all, let me be clear in case anybody has any doubt. I do not support what President Obama did with respect to the 5 million. I don't support much of anything that President Obama does, and you can read that every week in my column. But what he did 2 things. What he did is he gave to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and was really Secretary Johnson who issued the statement. It doesn't come from the president. It was an executive order. It was executive action out of DHS. What it did was to prioritize deportations and who we were going to get rid of the 11 million people who were here. Because I will tell you, nobody is really talking about rounding up 11 million men, women, and children and sending them south of the border. That's not going to happen. And if it were to happen, it would be like an atom bomb hitting, the city of Los Angeles in terms of its effect on our economy. So that's not going to happen. So I'm not in favor of that. But what he did was he said to the DHS secretary, you can prioritize whom you're going to deport, and the priority is going to be criminals. You're going to deport criminals first. That's where we're going to spend our attention. And what the judge did in Texas, the lower court, the district court judge did in Texas, was to say he has the authority to do that. And he does. That's called prosecutorial discretion, and he has the authority to do that. What he does not have the authority to do is to give those persons permits to work. That is governed by law. Now, I don't happen to like the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act. I think it's a bad law. And I agree with Anders that when you got a bad law, you got to change it. And I would change it by doing some of what you suggested. By admitting a certain number of people on a temporary basis to take jobs, some of them seasonal jobs. Certainly ag workers, we need more. 75% of the fruit and vegetables that you eat every day are picked by somebody who is illegally in the country. I don't like that. I would rather we had a way to bring legal people here. So let's have a guest worker program. But that's only part of the solution. We also need to have a more generous, thoughtful, free market-based legal immigration system as well. Because I don't want millions upon millions of people coming here and having jobs here and living here, but not becoming American. I want people who come here to make a better life to want to become American. So I want to make sure that we have a legal immigration system that also brings in people in greater numbers than we have now, so that they will not just contribute to our economy, but they will become us. And they will do so by learning English, by learning civics, by obeying the law, paying their taxes, and by becoming citizens. Now, What we do about the 11 million who are here, that, I think, is a problem that is not going to get solved until Barack Obama leaves office, because no one trusts him to enforce any law that's passed, even if he were to assign it.
Linda, before we go to Randy, isn't it true that country after country across Europe has regretted allowing unassimilated immigrant populations to live there, do many important labor functions, and never become integrated into the culture of the political
That's
system?
right. That is a recipe for disaster. I mean, again, just coming from Germany, Germany imported mostly Turks, Muslim Turks, I might add, to Germany for generations. They didn't allow them to become, even their children were born there, they had, their grandchildren born there, they still could not become German citizens until they passed a law about a decade ago allowing that. We don't want that either. We do not want an underclass of workers who essentially are not tied to this country. We want to do it the way we did when your grandparents came here. We want to give people the opportunity to come here. Sure, they're going to start on the bottom rungs, but over time, they're going to move up that rung, and they're going to move into the middle class, and they're going to become Americans and be proud Americans and serve this country.
Randy, what about this two-track or two-layer model that the questioner, Mike, proposed?
Well, I'm open to a host of ideas, but the first thing that we have to do is actually get control of and an understanding of who is coming in and leaving this country. That is not a complicated task in the 21st century in the United States of America. As far as I love Helen Kriebel's red card idea, where there's a kind of a marketplace for workers. I need this kind of worker. The person has an identification, they've been checked out, they have easy access across the border and easy access to go home. Many of the people who stay on work visas don't go home because they're afraid they can't come back again. Make that easy to go back and forth, not with citizenship rights or anything like that, but with a job market that attracts people who are willing to do that work. I heard Linda mention that, in today's America, there are those jobs that American kids won't do. And then I look at 17% black unemployment among black youth, 13 or 14%. Haven't updated the numbers recently, but high unemployment among college graduates, American students. You cut off this influx of cheap, often illegal, sometimes not tax-paying, under the table labor, and those people who need those jobs done are going to be forced to actually pay a better wage. Provide a better benefit, make it possible, make it interesting and attractive for a student who's sitting at home in his parents' basement or whatever, to at least be working, making money, buying a car, doing the things that motivate people while they work themselves up into a higher career. I'm completely fine with a track to allow workers in and out of the country as the market dictates. As long as we can separate them from the welfare system, as long as we know who they are. Linda mentioned all the extra money and the extra personnel that's thrown on the border. Doesn't do a darn bit of good if you tie their hands behind their back. And that's what this administration has done. So I'm not going anywhere until we have control of our southern border and the northern border as well. And at that point, I am open to any suggestion that allows us to fill our workplace needs, gives people opportunities to come here. And I have no objection to people becoming citizens of this country if they want to learn our language, if they want to know something about our history, not to the exclusion of their culture, but as part of their culture, as part of embracing actually being American. If we don't have that class or that group or that quality of people here, then the American dream and the American ideal is dead. And as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to fight to see that never happens.
Ron, the man in the flag shirt gets recognized.
Couple of points. First of all, I'd like to say that I felt like I was being spoken to directly because I was conservative before conservative was cool. And in fact, I was a supporter of Goldwater back in 1964, and if I hadn't just been 17 years old, I would have voted for him as well. But when I think about unalienable rights, I totally support unalienable rights. I also support sovereignty. And you and I were born created equal. We both have unalienable rights, Anders, but I have no right to walk into your home unannounced or uninvited. And the same with you, you have no right to walk into mine uninvited or unannounced. And I'd like to make that point, and I'd also like to say about the 11 million people who are here already, Linda, I wish you would tell that to the Colorado State Highway Patrol, because I know when I get caught for speeding that I'm not the only one that was speeding on that highway that day. Yet they found me, they ticketed me, and by right, I needed to pay that ticket. And I think with regard to those 11 million that are here, when we know they're here, we know who they are, we need to send them home, and that will then begin the act of attrition.
It will throw this country not into a recession, but literally into a depression if we do that. They are
I could not disagree more.
They are 6% of the workforce, and I am telling you, you think you know who they are, but it would take going door to door.
Well, I'm not suggesting going door to door. I'm saying if one stopped, one seeks medical services, if one goes to the police, if one goes any
We
place
already
in
do
their
that.
if they put their children in school, and we know that that child is a child of an illegal immigrant, send them home.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. You are in the very small minority of Americans who do. Well, you were as well, but I don't think it's practical that we're going to take people, half of those 11 million have been here 10 years or more. Many of them do, in fact, have U.S. citizen children. I don't think most Americans want to round them up. I think what they do want to do is to treat the law that they broke, and they are lawbreakers. They have broken a law. About 60% of them cross the border illegally. That is a criminal infraction, but it is a misdemeanor. It is a misdemeanor that is subject to a fine and no more than 6 months incarceration. And so, you know, what has been talked about in terms about legalizing the status of those, when George W. Bush advocated it, he wanted a $2,000 per head fine for anybody who came in and got legal status. He wanted to ensure a criminal background check, and he wanted to ensure that all taxes were paid. That is, I think, the right kind of penalty for breaking a criminal statute that is at a misdemeanor level.
Let's
And-
take the young lady in the back here, please.
Hi. So I just want to respond to you really quick.
Would you, and introduce yourself. I should have asked everyone to please introduce him and herself.
My name is Tracy Paulvode. I'm currently a sophomore here at CCU, Global Studies major. I do agree with you. If we were to send back the 11 million immigrants that are here illegally, our economy would drop. Like, we would have the same economy equivalent to, like, Mexico. Because look at, I'm sorry, guys. Look at this room. There's maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 students to 75 not students. So if you really want to become a mechanic, or you want to become a trash man, or you want to do the jobs that nobody else wants to do, go ahead, be my guest. I don't want to do it. But also, I wanted to respond to something that Randy and Linda said earlier. You were talking about how you wanted to make the immigration laws easier, and you wanted to have some sort of specialization category that would lean towards our market. But how would you know what our market needs? It's a free market. We don't have any way to track what jobs are needed where. It's too big to do that. Like, you can't possibly know what needs are everywhere. Like, the needs in here are different from Iowa, you know?
You're absolutely right about that, and unfortunately, that's what the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act tried to do. It tried to determine how many workers we were going to need 10 years, 20 years hence, and that every time we write an immigration law, we get some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. trying to figure out how many workers we're going to need. There's no way that that works. That's not a market. Randy talked about Helen Kriebel's approach, which was allowing employers to be the ones who actually went to the marketplace, said what jobs they had. Under the rules, you would have to first advertise those jobs to Americans, and you would have to show that an American did not apply for the job or would not take the job. You'd have to pay the rates, the prevailing rates that were in that particular labor market. So that would be one way of doing it. The other way would be to do it by looking at, indicators like unemployment. You would not allow as many people in when unemployment went above 4% as you would when it was below 4% or 5%. You could set the trigger.
I know Helen Raleigh's given this a lot of thought. Helen, you have sort of a skills clearinghouse concept, don't you, in your proposal?
Yes, and it's basically modeled after the Canadian and Australia immigration system. They both, majority of the Canadian and Australian immigration system are focused on tracking skilled workers, so they have this scorecard. The scorecard will measure your education, skill sets, and adaptability, age, etc. So 6 categories. But both Canada and Australia have national database of posting jobs, especially the one in Australia. The one in Australia is updated on annual basis. If you go on there to say, I want to be a skilled worker, they not only have the job description and requirements, they even have a contact information to say how you can get your skill sets assessed before you apply. So basically, they reduce a lot of the paperwork that we're doing here, have manual interviews. They basically allow you as immigrant to say, if I have a skill set and I can be assessed and meet your market needs, then I can sponsor myself to become an immigrant as a skilled workers in your country. And granted, Australia and Canada are much smaller country than we are, but those systems are out there, the national database, market-based are out there. That's definitely something we can adopt as well and run much more efficiently.
John, may I weigh in real quick?
Yeah, please.
When I hear about the idea that, and I'm not advocating trying to deport 11 million people, that's just impractical. It's never going to happen. I like the wannabe Barry Goldwater campaign manager for President Gold, that if you come into contact with people who are breaking the laws, deal with them as lawbreakers. There will be some attrition. There will be some people who won't just stick around for that. But when we're living in an economy, these phony unemployment numbers that are being touted as, look, we're finally getting through a recovery, are because, what's the number? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, 90 million people have left the workforce. The labor participation rate is at absolute historic lows. You take away those low-income, low-wage workers and force people, businesses, whoever, to pay a wage that actually fits American citizen and American lifestyle or whatever. And a good chunk of there's 90 million people out of the labor force right now. I think maybe we can find 10 of them, 10 million or so, to replace some of the 11 million. Not that that's ever going to happen. But you've always got to think it through to the next step. And if we could magically wave a magic wand and pull those 11 million people out of this country without hurting them, the idea that those jobs would go unfilled, people would be paying more and more and more, competing for the workers that are out there. That's how free markets work.
But Randy, that if you're paying more and more to the workers, then you're also charging your customers more and more. I mean, it doesn't work. Do you want to pay $5 for a tomato? I mean, we could probably pay $35 an hour to tomato pickers and find people to take those jobs. Although I will tell you, I have practical experience in this. I actually sat on the board of the largest chicken processing company in the country for 5 years, Pilgrim's Pride. We, in fact, were one of the first employers nationwide to use E-Verify. We used we followed the law down the road. But a lot of people who were working for us, not a lot, 500 people as it turned out, were here illegally, and we had a raid, and they were rounded up and presumably deported. And I will tell you what happened to the company after that was we were already paying in the range of $19 to $21 an hour. We raised $1 more, $2 more, $3 more. We found we had to provide transportation, then we had to provide housing. And all of that would have been fine. Of course, the chicken prices would have gone through the roof. But the fact was, we couldn't keep workers doing those jobs. Standing on a chicken processing line is nasty, difficult, dangerous work. And Americans who are educated in American schools are too good for it. They don't want to do those jobs, nor should they do those jobs. Now, Pilgrim's Pride had a choice to make. They shipped some of their work to Mexico. And it came down to the old, bring Muhammad to the mountain or the mountain to Muhammad. You can either bring the people to pick the vegetables and fruits here and to man the processing lines here, or you can pick up and take those jobs south of the border. And I will tell you, that is not going to help the American economy to take those jobs south of the border.
Anders, why don't you get in on this, please?
Sure, yeah, so here, this is a perfect example of where we were, and I don't disagree with what Linda just said, but this is a perfect example where we're tying a field, in this case jobs, to immigration, and focusing in on something that I consider non-essential. I mean, the problem, and I don't disagree with Randy that we have a lot of people out of the workforce, and the statistics are probably lying. But how do we address that? Well, common conservative principles of smaller government, reduce taxes, and jobs will skyrocket, the available jobs, and employers will scream for people from within the country and from abroad. That's how you solve that problem. Don't blame the immigrants.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Sure.
When we talk about immigration, let's not also forget that we have high-skilled workers too. Because I was on H-1B visa, and the H-1B visa is for people with at least a college education. And the average salary for H-1B visa is $75,000 a year. That's way higher than the average salary of American, which is about $59,000 a year. So there's a very strict requirement from the U.S. Labor Department about paying foreign workers the market rate. Just want to throw it out there.
I think that the robot that runs this building is giving us the hook here, friends.
Time to get out.
Andrews can take a hint. We're going to let Pam Serbo ask the last question, and as she does so, I invite the panelists to prepare in your thinking your 1-minute closing statements. Pam?
Okay, I don't think I need the microphone. Helen touched on prevailing wages, and that's one of the things, and also you guys did not talk about the human exploitation. I would very much disagree with Linda Chavez's position about charging people who are coming illegally over the border. They paid $5,000 to coyotes. They don't need to pay anymore. I find that offensive. I just don't think that one needs to be. I would disagree on the H-1B visas simply because we have STEM workers that have stagnant wages, and Dr. Farah did testify in front of Congress saying that many H-1B visa workers are paid half of what a U.S. citizen is being paid. A lot of our engineers are out of work. An entry-level job for an engineer, I have one at home living with us, and they want 1 to 3 years experience or 3 to 5 years experience. I don't call that an entry-level job. We're bringing in 1 million people a year legally. We are the most generous country in the world. Not another country brings in as many legal immigrants as we do. I would say take 40% of the people here on overstay visa. Let's start there. I'm not interested in the maid or the garbage collector or whomever. We'll worry about that later and get rid of the drug cartels. We're not doing that one either. So we haven't done anything about, you guys haven't talked about the tunnels and shutting down the tunnels in Nogales, Arizona. I'm from southern Arizona. I grew up there. So I do know about that, and my parents do know about being close to the border. So this hits home for me very, very close. And only 6 miles of that fence was built. So I'd say, folks, we've got 96 million unemployed. We have 46 million of our citizens on food stamps. I would say we send, when you find them, they came over in groups of 10 and 20. And I was in southern Arizona last summer, and I heard the illegals coming up west of my parents' property, to be picked up on Valencia Road to be going on down on I-10 at 6 in the morning because that's when it was full. So I'd say, yeah, they didn't come at 11 million and rush our borders. And our federal government has human trafficked these children, and they gave them to whoever said, oh yes, it's fine. They never check on those children. So I would say we've got big, big problems. Thank you.
Pam, we're going to take that as a comment, and I think it's simply indicative that if we had the time, that lots of us in the room would have personal, firsthand, and impassioned observations to make about this very, very difficult and important issue. We've only scratched the surface tonight, in other words, and I wish there were time for more questions and discussion and comments from all of you, and I know our panel would probably be glad to stand around and chat informally with you a little bit after we adjourn. I'm going to go down, starting with Chavez, and come to this end and finish up with Raleigh, and ask each of you for a 30 to 60-second closing statement, or if you want to treat it as a call to action. What would you like 100 concerned Americans to be doing about this issue as we adjourn tonight, starting with Linda?
Well, first of all, John, I want to thank you. And I want to say, not just to the audience, but to my fellow panelists, this may be the best panel on immigration that I've participated in, and I've done a whole lot of them. And part of the reason is, despite our differences, we actually Randy and I actually agree more than we disagree. There is a lot of agreement on this panel. And if the people back in Washington who make our laws could sit down in a group like this and listen to us and listen to practical solutions, listen to the impassioned piece of people like Pam. Pam, you're absolutely right. You know, the question of visa overstayers, and Randy, you're going to like this. There is no reason in the world that we should not, when we give somebody a visa, have a way to be able to track that person once they're in the United States. And, you know, yes, when we pass new laws, they have to be enforceable. So we could do that. We could fix that. This is not rocket science. This is not brain surgery. This is a problem that is solvable. And it is a problem that we need to solve. But the way in which we solve it is not by name calling and not by, you know, demonizing people or talking about invasions and talking about people as if they're not human beings. It's about sitting down and saying, we have a great tradition in this country of ours. We are a nation that is founded on an idea. And that idea has been open to people from every part of the world. We have forged the greatest nation, not just in the world today, but the greatest nation in the history of the world. And we are still doing that today. We need to figure out a way to have a policy that makes sense for Americans, that treats those who want to come here and be part of our society and contribute to us in a humane way and in a way that makes sense for all of us. And if the kind of comedy, C-O-M-I-T-Y, not E-D-Y, that exists here in this room tonight could be transferred to Washington, we could solve this problem in about 2 weeks.
I knew that when I shorted Linda's ancestors a century, she was going to get back at me by taking 2 minutes for her 1 minute close. Well chosen words, all of them, and thank you for the compliment. I think it's been a great panel too. Randy, are you ready to sing a chorus of Kumbaya?
Well, here's the deal. I have no doubt that smart, well-intentioned people like so many of us in this room and the people that are sitting up here whose ideas, regardless of how much we disagree with each other, are centered around the principles that really could help us salvage our nation. The problem is that's not the problem. The problem isn't that we don't have enough good-willed people willing to sit down and talk about it. The problem is that there is an agenda underway in the United States of America. The Democrat Party that used to also be as patriotic as you or I has been co-opted. And it's a radical progressive party with an agenda. And that agenda is to dismantle the United States of America. We elected a president based on the promise that he was going to fundamentally transform the United States of America. And so for those who've said that he's inept or he's incompetent or he doesn't know what he's doing, I've read a lot of history. Our country has never changed so fundamentally in a short period of time. So I'm going to, for my thinking, for my listening audience, for the things I'm going to be spending my time on, I'm going to table the conversation about all of the kumbaya stuff, the compromises that we could work with, until we get this federal government reined in and under control.
And you're sending me home tonight wishing that we could just have back the good old Harry Reid of 20 years ago. Anders.
Thanks, John. So I've tried to articulate a vision here, and I think a vision is really important. And I believe that that vision is eventually to have a system of free immigration, as Linda said, get back to where we were 120 some years ago. Now, obviously, that will take time. But Helen's proposal, Linda articulated a lot of good ideas. I mean, the ideas are out there. I could basically say that I second Linda on everything you said in your closing. So I will just end with a quote. And this is from President Ronald Reagan. In his January 11th, 1989 farewell speech to the nation, he said, and I quote, "I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace, a city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still." End of quote. Let's fight for making Ronald Reagan's vision, his shining city upon a hill, a reality. Thank you.
Anders, thank you. Last word goes to Helen Raleigh.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Centennial Institute for taking such a leadership role in such an important topic. And thanks to my fellow panelists, and I really learned a great deal from them. Tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. My husband is an Irish American. My mother-in-law, they're all Irish American. When we celebrate, tomorrow when you wear the green beads or drink an Irish beer, I want you to remember that we are a country of immigrant. And the same thing said today about whether it's low-skilled or high-skilled workers, or same thing said to the Irish immigrant, or the same thing said to German immigrants, or the same thing said to the Jews, the Chinese, every generation, because I can understand it does cause anxiety among the natives when there's a new wave of people coming to our country. So I encourage you that I think one thing can cure anxiety is to be better informed about it. There is a policy brief out there, to my own horn, but it does start from the very beginning to explain what are the different ways to become a legal immigrant in this country and the different requirements. So I think if all of us can be better informed about what are the existing laws out there, what are the requirements, and maybe it will help us to make a better decision or contact our representatives to make sure they make a better decision. And last but not least is, let's not forget what our country was founded upon. I do agree with Anders that before we make any decision, propose any solution, let's reaffirm what our country was founded upon. What are the principles? Are we proposing a principled solution? So thank you.
Mark your calendar for Wednesday. Next month's issue forum is Wednesday, April 8th. We'll be hearing from 4 eyewitnesses to Putin's slow-motion takeover of Ukraine. Going to be a fascinating evening, just as this one has been. In a moment, I will ask you to join me in one more warm round of thanks to Linda Chavez, Randy Corporon, Anders Ingemarson, Helen Raleigh, and I particularly commend to you Helen's wonderful book, the teaching autobiography, Confucius Never Said. It's on sale out at the desk, and she'd be glad, I know, to personally autograph it for you, or perhaps a young person that you would like to make a gift of Helen's book. We will see you all again on April 8th for Issue Wednesday about the Ukraine, and we look forward to lots of you joining us also in June at Western Conservative Summit. It's just 100 days from now. It's going to sell out this year. We're going to pack that Colorado Convention Center. Don't miss being there. Get your tickets tonight at westernconservativesummit.com. And now let's once again thank Linda, Randy, Anders, and Helen.